I never thought a simple Sunday morning car wash would turn into a full-blown neighborhood scandal. The sun was bright, glinting off the deep metallic green paint of my Lamborghini Urus as I wiped it down in my driveway. The scent of fresh wax mixed with the faint smell of cut grass from the house next door. Birds chirped, sprinklers ticked, and everything felt normal until I heard the shrill, unmistakable voice of Karen echo across the cul-de-sac. "Excuse me, what is that doing here?" she barked, pointing at my car like it was some wild animal trespassing on her precious property. I looked up, confused, wiping sweat from my forehead with the edge of my towel. "You mean my car?" I asked, but she was already marching toward me in her floral robe and slippers, her sunglasses barely hanging on her nose. She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, staring at the Lamborghini like it had personally offended her. "This is a family neighborhood, not a racetrack," she hissed. "That monstrosity doesn't belong here. You're lowering the property value." I almost laughed, thinking she had to be joking. "Karen, it's a luxury SUV, not a rocket launcher," I replied calmly. She squinted at me, her lips tightening. "You know, someone like you shouldn't even own something like that. It sends the wrong message." The arrogance in her tone made my stomach twist, but I kept my cool. "I worked for it," I said. "I'm not selling it." That's when she smiled, that fake, sugary smile that always meant trouble was coming. "We'll see about that," she said softly, before turning away and storming back to her house. For the next few days, I caught her peeking from behind her curtains whenever I started the engine. Her husband pretended not to notice, mowing their lawn while she stood on the porch, arms folded like a self-appointed sheriff. One afternoon, she approached again, this time holding a clipboard. I spoke to the HOA. She declared proudly, "Your vehicle violates the community guidelines. Too loud, too flashy, too disruptive." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny," I said, "because I checked the bylaws before buying the house. There's nothing in there about car color or brand." She blinked rapidly, caught off guard for a second, then jabbed the paper with her finger. "I can make a motion to add it." That's when I realized this wasn't about rules, it was about control, about power. She tried everything: anonymous letters about noise complaints, fake signatures from neighbors who didn't even exist. Every morning, I'd find new passive-aggressive notes stuck to my mailbox. "This isn't Beverly Hills. Your arrogance is showing. Some of us have taste." I ignored them all, but inside, I could feel the tension building. One evening, I pulled into my driveway to find her standing right in front of my gate, blocking me. "You should sell it," she said flatly. "You'll thank me later." Her tone was oddly calm this time, like she was offering me a deal. "Sell it for how much?" I asked, humoring her. She looked at me with that smug grin. $1. I blinked. "You can't be serious." She smiled wider. "It's either that, or I'll have the HOA fine you into selling it anyway. Your choice." For a moment, I thought I misheard her. $1 for a Lamborghini worth hundreds of thousands. I laughed out loud, shaking my head. "Karen, you've officially lost it." But she didn't laugh back. She leaned closer and whispered, "You'll regret that." Her perfume was overwhelming, sharp, synthetic, and somehow threatening. I drove past her, the Urus rumbling softly, and she stood there watching, her expression icy. That night, as I locked my garage, I had the uneasy feeling that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of sirens, faint at first, then louder, until they were right outside my house. My heart pounded as I ran to the window. 2 police cars were parked in front of my driveway, lights flashing red and blue across the sleek green surface of my car. My stomach dropped. For a second, I thought maybe there had been an accident, but then I saw her, Karen, standing there with her arms flailing dramatically, pointing at my garage and yelling at the officers like she was the victim of a crime. I threw on a hoodie and stepped outside, heart racing. "What's going on?" I shouted. She turned to me with fake tears in her eyes. "Officers, that's him. That's the man who threatened me and tried to scam me with a stolen car." One of the cops looked at me, hand resting near his belt. "Sir, we received a call claiming you're in possession of a stolen Lamborghini and that you refused to comply when asked to surrender it." My mouth went dry. "What? That's insane," I stammered. "This car's mine. I have the title, the insurance, everything." Karen gasped dramatically. "Oh, please, he told me he got it off the books." He even offered to sell it to me for $1 like some shady deal. Her voice cracked as if she'd rehearsed it all. My jaw tightened. You offered me $1, remember? I said firmly. You told me to sell it or else. She stepped back, clutching her phone to her chest like I was dangerous. See, he's threatening me again. The neighbors started gathering now, some watching from porches, others recording with their phones. The heat of embarrassment burned my face, but I kept calm. Officer, I said, please, let's go inside. I'll show you my papers. They nodded cautiously, but before I could move, Karen shouted, he's hiding evidence. Look in his garage, that's where he keeps it. One of the officers gently motioned for me to stand aside. Sir, just cooperate. We'll check everything. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I unlocked the garage, and as the door lifted, the Lamborghini gleamed under the fluorescent lights, spotless, untouched. The officer examined the VIN number, matched it to my registration, and nodded. Everything checks out, he said quietly. Karen's face fell. No, that can't be right. She sputtered. He must have changed the plates. Her voice was cracking now, desperate. The officer turned to her, unimpressed. Ma'am, making a false report is a serious offense. But she wasn't done. She stepped forward, pointing her finger at me again. He's dangerous. He threatened the whole neighborhood with that thing. Look at him, who even owns a Lamborghini in a middle-class area unless they're hiding something. The words stung, but I stood tall. I own it because I worked for it. I said coldly, not because I owe anyone an explanation. She glared at me, trembling with fury, before spinning on her heel and screaming, "You'll regret this. I'll take this to court." The officers gave me an apologetic nod before leaving, and as the lights faded down the street, the cul-de-sac fell silent. Karen stood frozen on her lawn, her face pale, her phone still clutched in her hand. I could hear her muttering under her breath something about connections and higher-ups, but for the first time I saw something else in her eyes, fear, real genuine fear. Maybe she realized she'd gone too far this time. Or maybe she was just planning her next move. Either way, I knew this wasn't the end. That night, as I sat in my living room, the sound of rain tapping against the windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't done, that she'd find another way to try and destroy me. It had been 3 tense days since Karen called 911 on me, and though the street looked quiet, I could feel the storm still brewing underneath. The neighbors avoided eye contact, pretending to trim their hedges or check their mail, but I knew they'd all seen the scene. They'd seen her crying wolf, seen the cops drive away empty-handed, and most importantly, they'd seen her pride crumble. I tried to move on, but that feeling of being watched never left. Every time I stepped outside, I'd catch a flicker of movement behind her curtains. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be another false complaint. But then, on the 4th evening, just as the sun was bleeding gold across the rooftops, there was a knock on my door, sharp. Repetitive, confident, I opened it to find 2 officers standing there again, the same ones from before. "Mr. Hayes," one asked politely, "we'd like to follow up regarding the 911 incident from last week." My stomach tightened. I nodded, stepping aside to let them in. "Is there a problem?" I asked carefully. The taller officer shook his head. "Not with you," he said, his tone lowering slightly. "We're actually here to collect a formal statement. It appears the woman who filed that report has made multiple similar false claims against other residents." I blinked in disbelief. "You mean Karen?" The officer nodded. "That's the one. Her name's come up in at least 5 prior complaints, all bogus. HOA disputes, property trespassing, harassment reports, the works." As he spoke, something inside me clicked. This wasn't just about my car. She'd done this before, manipulated, lied, played the victim, and gotten away with it. I leaned back against the wall, exhaling slowly. "So what happens now?" I asked. The officer pulled out a small notepad. "We're preparing a case for misdemeanor false reporting, but before we move forward, we'd like your confirmation on the details of that day." I recounted everything: her demand to buy my Urus for $1, her threats, her performance with the police. The officers took notes, thanked me, and promised to keep me updated. When they left, I stood by the window for a long moment, staring across the street. Karen was standing on her porch, pretending to water her flowers, watching them drive away. That night, I got a call from the HOA president. His voice was tight, nervous. "Mr. Hayes, I wanted to personally apologize for the incident," he began. "Karen doesn't represent our board. She's been difficult." I almost laughed at his choice of word. "Difficult," I repeated. "She called 911 to get me arrested over a car." He sighed. "I know, and that's why there's going to be an emergency board meeting tomorrow. You might want to attend." When I walked into that meeting the next evening, every seat was filled. Karen sat in the front row, still defiant, her arms crossed. But this time, the confidence in her eyes was gone. The HOA president cleared his throat and read out the police report, every false call, every fabricated claim, every violation of community policy. By the time he finished, the room was dead silent. Karen's lips were trembling. "You can't do this," she stammered. "I was protecting our neighborhood." The president frowned. "From what, Karen? A resident who owns a legal vehicle, or from your own jealousy?" Her face turned red, and for a moment I thought she'd scream again. But instead, she stood up, pointed at me, and hissed, "You think you've won? You don't belong here. People like you never do." I leaned forward, calm and steady. "Funny," I said softly, "because I actually do. I'm not just your neighbor, Karen. I'm the new majority investor in this HOA. I own the property next door, and I'm reviewing all the board positions, starting with yours." The color drained from her face instantly. Gasps rippled through the room. The president turned to me, startled. "You're the investor." I nodded. "I bought in last month. I didn't think it was relevant until now." Karen's jaw dropped, her voice barely a whisper. You can't do that." I met her glare evenly. I already did. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard in weeks. By the end of that night, the board had voted to suspend her indefinitely pending legal review, and the officers later confirmed she'd been fined for false reporting. As I walked back to my house under the cool night air, the neighborhood felt different, lighter, quieter. For the first time, her windows were dark. The next morning, I rolled my Lamborghini out of the garage, the sunlight catching every curve of its green paint. Neighbors waved, some even smiled, and not a single curtain twitched from Karen's house. As I climbed in, the leather smelled rich and clean, and the engine purred like nothing had ever happened. I took a deep breath and smiled. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it hums softly in your driveway, gleaming in the morning light. Before I drove off, I took one last look at her house and whispered, "Next time you call 911, make sure it's for something real." Then I hit the ignition, the exhaust growling low and proud, and drove away free, calm, and completely untouchable. Before we wrap this up, tell me, what would you have done if your neighbor called 911 over your car? Comment your country below. Hit like if Karen got what she deserved. And remember, power means nothing without integrity.